My husband spoke only 7 words before he died. And those 7 words destroyed 41 years of what I thought was a good marriage. I didn't cry when he said them. I froze. Because in that moment, I realized the truth. I hadn't been a good wife. I'd been a comfortable one. If you're listening right now, help me prove something wrong. My mother said I wouldn't even reach 1,000 subscribers, but I believe stories like this deserve to be heard. Help me show her that these tales matter. Please subscribe to Olive Revenge Stories, and let's keep breathing life into stories that were never meant to stay silent. Now, let's continue. We were married 41 years. Longer than most people stay in one job. Longer than some of you have been alive. And yet, I didn't really know him. My name is Sarah, and this is what it looks like to waste a lifetime next to someone and only realize it when he's gone. They say the best marriages are the ones without conflict. The ones where you don't fight. Where you maintain stability, respect each other's space, and gradually build a life together like you're assembling furniture from an instruction manual. No arguments. No drama. Just quiet companionship and the comfort of someone being there. I thought the absence of conflict meant the presence of love. But I was wrong. So very, very wrong. When I married James Mitchell in the spring of 1983, I was 24 years old, and I thought I had everything figured out. I wore my grandmother's pearl earrings, and he wore a gray suit that made him look like someone important. The ceremony was simple. 200 people. A church on Maple Street in Columbus, Ohio. My mother cried. His mother looked proud. And I remember thinking, as I stood there with his hand in mine, that this was it. This was the moment where everything begins. I was wrong about that too. James was quiet. Not shy, just quiet. The kind of man who listened more than he spoke, which I mistook for wisdom. He was an accountant. A good one. Numbers made sense to him in a way that people never quite did. He organized our finances with the same precision he organized a sock drawer. Everything labeled, everything in its place. Everything controlled. When our daughter Emma was born in 1986, something shifted between us, but we didn't talk about it. We never talked about anything really. We existed in the same house. We slept in the same bed. We raised a child together. But we were living parallel lives, moving in the same direction at the same speed, never actually colliding. He would come home from work at 5:47 p.m. I could set a clock by it. He would kiss me on the cheek, not because he wanted to, but because he had added it to his daily routine. He would ask about my day, and I would give him the headlines. Emma's school event. What I was making for dinner. A problem with the kitchen sink. He would nod and go upstairs to change his clothes. Then he would come down and read the newspaper while I prepared dinner. We would eat together mostly in silence, asking Emma about her day at school, and she would talk, and we would listen, and it felt like what families were supposed to do. I thought this was marriage. I thought this was how it was supposed to feel. Calm. Predictable. Safe. Nothing was wrong, which meant nothing was right. When our son Michael was born in 1989, James seemed less excited than he was with Emma. I remember thinking that maybe he just wasn't the sentimental type. Maybe that was just who he was. He held Michael carefully, like the baby might break, and handed him back to me after a few minutes. He never asked to hold him again. Not really. He was a present father in a technical sense. He went to school events. He helped with homework. He provided. But there was a distance between him and our children that I mistook for respect. I didn't realize he was building a wall. I was too busy being a wife and a mother. I was too busy being efficient. When you're raising 2 kids and maintaining a household and trying to be everything everyone needs, you don't have time to wonder if your husband is sad. You don't have time to notice that he's slowly disappearing. You don't have time to see that the man you married is becoming a ghost in his own home. Years blurred together. Emma graduated high school. Michael made the soccer team. James got promoted. We bought a bigger house on Willow Court. We took vacations where we drove for 7 hours and stayed in hotels where the walls were thin, and we pretended to sleep so we wouldn't have to talk to each other. I wasn't cruel. I was efficient. We didn't fall apart. We slowly faded. Sometimes I wonder if he was waiting for me to ask him about his dreams. If he was waiting for me to notice that he stopped mentioning the things he wanted to do. He used to talk about traveling to the national parks out west. He used to mention it casually, the way you do when you're still holding on to hope. Maybe next summer, he would say, when we have a little more saved up, when the kids are older, when things slow down. And then he stopped mentioning it. I was so relieved when he stopped mentioning it because it meant one less thing to plan around. One less complication. One less demand on my time. That's when he stopped asking. That was the exact moment he gave up. I realized that too late. Much too late. I remember the summer of 2001 like it was yesterday, even though it's more than 2 decades ago now. Emma was working as a paralegal in Cincinnati. Michael was in his second year at Ohio State. James was 52 years old, and something in him had changed completely. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't something you could point to. It was more like someone had turned down the volume on his life, and I had gotten so used to the quiet that I didn't notice the silence anymore. He stopped fixing things around the house. For 20 years, any problem, he would solve it. A leaky faucet. A loose shingle. A cabinet door that wouldn't close properly. He would go to his workshop in the basement and come back with tools and he would fix it. But now things started breaking and staying broken. I would mention it to him and he would nod and say he'd take care of it and then he wouldn't. I thought he was getting lazy. I thought he was losing his edge. I didn't realize he was losing his will. He stopped wanting to go to dinner. I would suggest going to that Italian place we had always liked, and he would say he was tired. He would say he wanted to stay home. Eventually, I stopped suggesting. He stopped coming to Emma's law school graduation. Just decided he wasn't going. Said he had a work project he couldn't leave. That was a lie. I found out later that he hadn't even mentioned the work project to anyone at his office. He just didn't want to go. And I let him stay home. I didn't push. I didn't demand an explanation. Because by then I was so used to him not wanting things that his absence felt normal. Nothing was wrong. But nothing was right either. He became a ghost who paid the bills and showed up for dinner. He was there, but he wasn't present. He existed, but he wasn't living. And I told myself that this was what marriage looked like when you'd been together long enough. When the novelty wore off. When you settled into the reality of who people actually are instead of who you hoped they would be. I was very good at rationalization. I was very good at accepting less than I deserved and calling it love. The clock started ticking in April of 2019. That's when Dr. Harrison called with the diagnosis. Pancreatic cancer. Advanced stages. The kind that doesn't wait around. The kind that accelerates. I remember James was sitting next to me on the phone, and I watched his face when the doctor said it, and for the first time in years, I actually saw him. I saw my husband. The fear in his eyes was unmistakable. It was the most emotion he had shown me in 2 decades. And I finally woke up, because suddenly we had an expiration date. Suddenly time was no longer something we had in abundance. Suddenly I realized that all the conversations we never had, all the trips we never took, all the dreams we abandoned, all of it was gone. We could never get it back. Never. Not in the way that mattered. We finally started talking when time ran out. It was like a dam had broken, and he needed to tell me everything at once before the window closed. He told me about the job offer he had turned down in 1994 because I was pregnant with Michael, and he didn't want the instability. He told me he had always wanted to learn guitar, but had decided it was impractical. He told me his father died when he was 15 and it had broken him, and he had spent the rest of his life trying not to need anyone because needing people meant losing them. He told me that Emma's first birthday, when she was crying and reaching for him, he had wanted to hold her but was afraid that if he couldn't be perfect at it, if he couldn't control the situation, he shouldn't try. He told me he had been lonely our entire marriage. He had been lonely standing right next to me. These confessions came in pieces. A little at dinner. A bit more while we were driving to his appointments. A fragment late at night when he couldn't sleep because of the pain. And with each revelation, I felt something inside me breaking. Not dramatically. Slowly. Like watching ice melt. I had spent 41 years married to a man, and I had never asked him who he really was. I had never pushed past his silence. I had accepted his distance as something fixed and immovable instead of something I could have changed. I could have asked him to come with me to Emma's graduation. I could have insisted. I could have called him on it and demanded to know why. I could have noticed earlier that he was disappearing. I could have fought for him when there was still time to fight. But I didn't. I was too comfortable, too efficient, too eager to accept the quiet. The treatments were brutal. Chemotherapy ravaged him. He lost his hair. He lost weight. He lost the ability to hide how much pain he was in. And suddenly, after decades of emotional distance, we were forced into proximity. I was bathing him. I was holding a basin while he was sick. I was sleeping in the hospital chair next to his bed. I was seeing him in a completely vulnerable state for the first time since we had met. The man I had dismissed as emotionless was one of the strongest people I had ever known, fighting against impossible odds, fighting through unbearable pain, and still trying to comfort me even as he was dying. That's when I understood. He had built those walls because the world had taught him that weakness wasn't allowed, that need wasn't safe, that the only way to survive was to control everything you could and accept loss as inevitable. And I, in my comfort and my efficiency, had reinforced every single one of those beliefs. By accepting his distance, I had validated it. By not pushing back, I had told him that it was okay to disappear. I had abandoned him the way he thought everyone eventually would. The hospital room was cold. That's the detail that sticks with me. Not the machines beeping or the fluorescent lights or the smell of antiseptic. Just the cold. It was late May, and they had the air conditioning cranked up, and I was sitting there in a cardigan trying not to shiver while my husband lay in a hospital bed slowly dying. He had maybe 48 hours left. The doctors had been clear. His morphine dose was being increased. We were moving into comfort care. That's what they call it when they stop trying to cure you and just try to make sure you don't suffer too much while you're leaving. I was holding his hand. It felt like paper. Thin and fragile and nothing like the hands that had held mine on our wedding day. He was awake, which was unusual. Most of the time, he was sleeping from the medication. But his eyes opened, and he looked at me, and he squeezed my hand. Not very hard. He didn't have the strength for that. But I felt it. And he spoke. Those 7 words. We were polite instead of honest. That's what he said. And then he closed his eyes again and went back to sleep. I sat there staring at his face, and it was like every moment we had ever shared became suddenly clear. Every conversation we should have had but didn't. Every time I had chosen silence over speaking up. Every moment I had accepted his walls instead of asking him to let me in. We had been so polite, so careful, so determined not to disturb each other that we had practically disappeared from each other's lives. I had been so grateful that we didn't fight, that we didn't have conflict, that we maintained our composure, that we never raised our voices. And in all of that politeness, we had killed everything that was real between us. James died 2 days later. It was 3:47 in the morning. I was awake. I had been sleeping in that chair for weeks at that point, and I was so exhausted that I had developed a strange ability to sleep lightly, to exist in that space between consciousness and dreams. And when his breathing changed, I knew. I don't know how you know these things, but your body just recognizes it. The absence of sound where there should be sound. I stood up and I looked at him, and he was gone. My husband of 41 years had left, and he had done it quietly, just like he had lived. His last breath was the same as his first breath in my presence. Unremarkable. Controlled. Not demanding anything from anyone. The funeral was held on a beautiful day in June. 300 people came. People from his work. People from our neighborhood. Friends we had made over the decades. Extended family. And I remember thinking as I sat in the front row, dressed in black, that all of these people had known James better than I had. His coworkers had heard his jokes. His golf buddy Tom had spent more time with him talking about real things than I ever had. Even the barber had probably listened to more of his thoughts than I had in the previous decade. After the funeral, after everyone had left, after the house was quiet again, I found his journal. It was in his desk drawer, hidden under some tax documents from years before. A leather notebook with pages and pages of his handwriting. And I sat down, and I read every single word. It was devastating. It was heartbreaking. It was the conversation we should have been having for 40 years. He had written about his fears, his regrets, the ways he felt he had failed as a husband and a father because he couldn't show them what love looked like. He had written about the dreams he abandoned and why. He had written about the moment he decided to stop trying to be close to me. He had actually pinpointed it. March 15th, 1997. I had told him I was too stressed to go on a vacation he had been planning. Just a long weekend to Niagara Falls. I had said I didn't have the mental energy for a trip right now. I had said I was overwhelmed with Emma's schedule and Michael's school, and work was intense, and could we please just stay home? And he had written, in his careful, neat handwriting, that was the moment he understood that he could never ask for anything again. That his needs would always come last. That love, for him, would always mean disappearing. And so he had. Page after page of this man trying to understand himself, trying to work through the loneliness, trying to figure out how he had become someone who could sit next to his wife for 4 decades and feel completely alone. The last entry was dated 5 days before the diagnosis. Before he knew he was sick. He wrote about wanting to call me into his office and tell me that he was sorry. That he had wasted our time together by not knowing how to be present. That he was afraid he was already too broken to fix. He had written that he didn't know how to reconnect after so many years of disconnection. He didn't know if I would even want to listen. And he was afraid that if he tried to change things now, he would discover that it was already too late. It was already too late. That's what the last entry said. His handwriting on that page was shaky. I think he was crying when he wrote it. I sat in his office for hours just holding that journal. I didn't cry. I was beyond crying. I was in a state of devastation that existed beyond emotions. I had wasted 41 years with a man I loved, and I had killed that love through nothing more than systematic, careful, deliberate politeness. The aftermath has been strange. I have phases where I am okay, and phases where I am not okay at all. I went back to work. I filled the house with different furniture. I cut my hair. I made external changes hoping they would somehow reorganize the internal devastation. Emma and Michael have struggled. Emma more than Michael, because she was old enough to understand what James wasn't showing her. To understand that the emotional distance wasn't love, even though she didn't have the language for it as a child. Michael has done better. He has a wife and 2 kids, and he seems to have figured out how to be present in ways that James never could. That's something, I suppose. I've had time to think about what this means, what the lesson is, what the point of telling this story is, beyond just wallowing in regret. And I think it's this: love doesn't die in moments of passion or arguments or dramatic conflict. Love dies in the slow accumulation of small silences. Love dies when you decide that it's safer to accept distance than to fight for closeness. Love dies when you choose comfort over courage. Love dies when you stop asking questions because the answers might be difficult. Love dies quietly while you're busy maintaining the surface of your marriage and ignoring the fact that the foundation has been crumbling for years. I didn't lose my husband the day he died. I lost him years earlier, and I didn't even notice. I lost him every time I accepted his silence instead of demanding honesty. I lost him every time I chose efficiency over connection. I lost him every time I assumed his withdrawal was just who he was instead of asking what he needed. And now I live in a world where I have to carry that knowledge. I have to live with the fact that the man I was married to for 41 years spent most of his life lonely, and there is nothing I can do about it. Nothing I can do to fix it. Nothing I can do to go back and have the conversations I should have had. There are times when I think about calling him back. Even though I know it's impossible. Even though he's gone. I think about what I would say if I could. I think I would say that I'm sorry. I'm sorry for taking his silence for granted. I'm sorry for being grateful when he stopped asking for things. I'm sorry for choosing the easy road of polite coexistence over the hard work of genuine intimacy. I would ask him to forgive me for being too focused on the surface of our life to notice that he was drowning. I would ask him what his dreams were, and I would listen this time. I would listen without thinking about my schedule, or my stress, or my need to maintain control. I would listen the way I should have listened from the beginning. But I can't call him back. And that is the price I pay for a lifetime of politeness. So, what would you do differently? When you're in a relationship, when you have someone in your life that you claim to care about, what would you do differently knowing what happened to me? Where are you being polite instead of honest? Who are you accepting silence from when you should be asking questions? How many marriages look like mine looked? How many people are disappearing quietly next to someone who loves them, or thinks they do, but loves them poorly because they never learned to love well? These are the questions that haunt me. These are the things I think about at 3 in the morning when I can't sleep. The weight of that knowledge, that I had one life with one person and I wasted it on the surface of things. I can't change that now. But maybe, if I tell the story, maybe you can change yours. Maybe you can look at your spouse or your partner or your family member and instead of accepting their silence, you can ask them what they need. You can ask them what they're afraid of. You can ask them what they want to be when they grow up, even if they're already 60. You can push past the comfort of politeness and take the risk of honesty. You can choose to be present instead of efficient. You can choose to connect instead of just coexist. That's what I would tell you if I could reach through the screen and grab you by the shoulders. Don't wait until someone is dying to finally ask them who they are. Don't wait until it's too late to have the conversation that actually matters. We were polite instead of honest. And that mistake cost me 41 years of a real marriage. Don't let that be your story. Don't let that be what someone has to carry after you're gone. Be brave enough to demand honesty. Be brave enough to be vulnerable. Be brave enough to not accept less than what love actually requires. And if you're going through something similar, if you're recognizing yourself in my story, I want you to know that you're not alone. And it's not too late yet. You still have time. You still have the chance to reach across the distance and actually touch someone. You still have the chance to ask the questions that matter. Use it. Don't waste it the way I did.